series explores 3 E's: energy, the environment, and the economy, and their interdependency, and how decarbonization is serving to ensure all three are in balance and sustainable: energy, environment, and economy. Nothing, I mean nothing that I can think of, is more geopolitical of importance than embracing decarbonization. So, with that, welcome Eric Newell, the former captain of Alberta's energy industry.
And Hal, I think you've got an interesting job following Dennis's thing, and I have no doubt that you're up to the challenge, so away you go.
As Eric noted in his introduction, global energy demand is growing in step with both population growth and also energy intensity per capita, both populations going up and human energy consumption per capita is rising even faster. And that's fundamentally at odds with the decarbonization agenda, given that 80% of primary global energy is supplied by hydrocarbons. This creates an interesting dilemma right here in Canada. Our federal government is actively pursuing policies to effectively phase out hydrocarbons, looking heavily to electricity as the future of energy in Canada. And on the other hand, Canada is one of the world's largest producers of both oil and gas. Our energy production and processing sectors are critical to both global supply of hydrocarbons, but also to the economy of Western Canada. And if you look at this from the perspective of hydroelectricity in Quebec or nuclear power in Ontario, a shift from hydrocarbons to electricity does have some appeal. But from a Western Canada perspective, this is a disastrous policy. And so today we have this emerging as a serious national conflict, with the federal government clearly choosing sides and impairing our oil and gas sector through regulatory delay, through uncompetitive carbon taxes, and soon to impose upon us some mysterious clean fuel standard that, frankly, people deeply into it don't really understand how it'll work or what the impact will be. And so today in Glasgow, our Prime Minister and other global leaders have declared climate emergencies and made one pledge after another to achieve this mythical net zero by 2050. And interestingly, at the same time, President Biden's asking Saudi Arabia to increase production, and Western Europe is asking Russia to deliver more natural gas. And I think that is about as good an illustration of the fundamental conflict between actual global energy demand and these declarations of net zero. It also, though, illustrates the fundamental conflict between federal measures and the Western Canada hydrocarbon business. Federal measures that are being implemented today are a serious threat to the economies of Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan. And to illustrate that, think about Saudi Arabia. We all know that Saudi Arabia is wholly reliant on crude oil production, but consider it in relative terms. Saudi Arabia has 35 million people producing 10 million barrels a day. Western Canada, Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, have 11 million people producing 4 million barrels a day. We produce 20% more crude oil per capita than Saudi Arabia. The oil production game is significantly more important to Western Canada than it is to Saudi Arabia. And we know that they are in serious trouble without it. And look a little wider, we produce vastly more per capita than either Texas or Russia. So the energy sector is not only an overwhelming driver of our Western Canadian economy, it's also the largest employer of technical and financial professionals in Western Canada, and the largest employer of engineers and other technical professions in any part of this country. The auto manufacturing, forest products, mining, and so-called high-tech software sectors are important to Canada, but not one of those is a fifth as large or as important to Canada as the hydrocarbon energy sector. Now, energy sector capital investment is predicted to be only about $40 billion or so in the coming year, in 2022, 40 billion. That's much less than the 80 billion that was invested each year in the 2008 to 2014 period. But even so, the 40 billion that will be invested here in Western Canada will dwarf the overall capital investment in any other industrial sector in this country. So it may be a sunset industry. We may be phasing it out. We may be shifting from hydrocarbons to electricity, but we're still investing far more in it. And it's driven by global demand. So it's pretty important to us, but we face some serious challenges. 5 years ago, the environmental activist movement convinced the federal government to pass legislation, Bill C-69, that dramatically and severely impedes our ability to access North American and export markets by pipeline. There's only two significant pipeline projects proceeding today in Canada: TMX, the Trans Mountain Expansion, and Coastal GasLink. And both of those were approved before Bill C-69 took effect. Both are far behind schedule and far over budget. And in both cases, the major driver of those outcomes is federal regulatory delay and various forms of federal interference in the projects. Canada's courts have created all kinds of uncertainty around the requirement for free, prior, and informed consent by Indigenous parties. And this is hurting Indigenous people at least as much as it's hurting the industry. Now, a very interesting example today is that no drilling permits, no facility construction permits, no road building permits, and no provincial development permits of any kind are being issued in Northeast BC today as a result of the Blueberry decision by a BC court last summer. With a stroke of a pen, a BC Supreme Court justice froze all provincial permitting, not just in the Blueberry First Nation traditional territory, but across the entirety of Northeast BC, everything east of the Rocky Mountain Great Divide. And so this year, in 2022, several billion dollars of high value capital spending are not going to occur in Northeast BC unless this situation is somehow resolved quickly. So these are the challenges, but on the other hand, we've got a lot of strengths and capabilities here in our business. Our oil sands and tight gas resources are in fact highly economic today. And this is almost entirely the result of technologies that were developed here in Western Canada over the past 30 years. Our companies have turned previously worthless deposits into high value industries through ingenuity, advanced technology, and a whole lot of hard work. We've got 75 years of significant production history, and we emphatically have the best environmental, safety, and social responsibility record of any hydrocarbon producing area on Earth. Our engineering, geoscience, operating, and financing capabilities are among the best in the world. And a lot of those can be put to work on things like the production of hydrogen, on carbon capture and sequestration projects, and on all kinds of other initiatives to reduce emissions. Notwithstanding all of that, notwithstanding the challenges that I mentioned earlier, our energy sector remains highly competitive. It's remarkable to me, maybe less remarkable to you, Eric, because you were involved, but we're today the world's fourth largest oil producer. And it's amazing. Our oil and liquids production of almost 5 million barrels a day is essential to meeting North American refinery demand. The United States is not self-sufficient. They talk about it as if they are, but they're not. They're a big importer, but North America is energy self-sufficient. Between what we produce in Canada, Mexico, and the United States, we cover all of our North American domestic needs. Only 3 countries, the United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, produce more oil than Canada. This is a big industry. Our undeveloped oil potential is an order of magnitude larger than our current production. The oil sands are an incredible resource that could double production and sustain that for at least 100 years. Think about that, 10 million barrels a day for 100 years. And I want to turn to some other really interesting opportunity. Thanks to advances in horizontal drilling and multi-stage fracking, we now have the enormous economic natural gas resources in the Montney, the Duvernay, and other tight gas plays. And a lot of us are seeing today that the development and export of natural gas in the form of LNG could rival the economic impact of the oil sands. It's that big and the resource base is that large. If you look just at the Montney, I spent much of my career developing gas fields that had between 10 feet and 50 feet of hydrocarbon bearing pay. A really good well had 50 feet or maybe 15, 20 meters of hydrocarbon pay. Many parts of the Montney today have economic pay of more than 500 feet. And in some of the best wells I've looked at, the pay zone is more than 1,000 feet thick.
Yeah.
I mean, this is incredible. People talk about the Marcellus, they talk about Vaca Muerta in Argentina, but we sit here on the Montney in a play that can compete with anything on Earth. And it only came about because our engineers, our geoscientists, and our service providers figured out how to make it economic and how to make it happen. So we could produce these massive quantities of hydrocarbon and we could sustain them for decades. But how do you reconcile that with the global challenge of reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Well, like I say, if the world is demanding the hydrocarbon, somebody has to produce it. The global demand for hydrocarbon will be met one way or another. And here in Western Canada, we think we can produce that hydrocarbon with less environmental impact than anyone else. Yeah. But we face a lot of regulatory challenges. Consider our energy pipeline companies. And it's not an overstatement for me to say that based in Calgary, we have the world's two most sophisticated and capable pipeline companies right here, Enbridge and TC Energy. Not only are they highly capable and very big, they're larger than any pipeline company on Earth other than Gazprom, the Russian state-owned giant. Right. Yeah. And Enbridge and TC have been through the ringer on so many projects. Line 5 in Michigan, Line 3 in Minnesota, writing off $700 million on Northern Gateway, 3 or 4 billion in write-offs on Keystone XL, and of course the abandoned Energy East project. And all of these are strong and sensible projects, and they've all been pushed back. And this is all the continuing Western Canada challenge around access to market. Whether you were a fur trader in 1750 or an oil and gas producer today, it's all about how do we get to market. So how can we compete and how can we reconcile both the greenhouse gas challenge and the economic opportunity? Well, I think there's 3 obvious steps that our federal government should consider. The first is to moderate the Canada-wide carbon tax to a level that allows our companies right across the country to compete against those in the United States. Our current carbon burdens on manufacturers, transportation companies, virtually all businesses in Canada are putting a big competitive disadvantage on manufacturers and others in Canada to compete in the US market. The second is for the government to recognize that Western Canadian energy producers don't compete with Ontario or Quebec. We compete against Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and others. And the burdens that are imposed on our energy producers must be comparable to those that are imposed on our major global competitors. We can't solve the global greenhouse gas issue by shutting down the Canadian upstream sector. We have to be able to compete at the local level. Number 3, Canada is a big, cold country. We need to move around and we need to heat our buildings. It's actually a matter of life and death here. And I look out the window at all the snow in Cochrane here today. And natural gas remains our cleanest option. The conversion of gasoline and diesel applications to natural gas would cut emissions by about 50%. And yet today, we put a penalty on those conversions by imposing onerous carbon taxes on the very fuel that Canadians need to survive the winter. So I'll stop there, Eric. I just close by putting it in a global perspective. If you look back over the past few hundred years, very few trillion-dollar assets have been developed globally over time. The gold and diamond fields of South Africa would be an example, the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, the gas fields of Siberia, the enormous agricultural capacity that's been developed in the United States and China, Another example would be the copper resources of Chile. And there are only two Canadian assets today that meet the $1 trillion test, the Alberta oil sands and the Montney tight gas. Are we really willing to phase those out when the world still has strong demand for energy? So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, that was great, Al. Uh, First of all, I share your passion. You know the natural gas business a little bit better enough for that, but you know, I have bitumen in my blood and love the oil sands. But it's very true. One of the things that I like to emphasize is the whole question about pipeline access and that. You know, Canada could be a superpower, energy superpower. We're not going to be one until we can access the market. So somehow we got to get that across to our countries. And as I said earlier with Dennis's thing, somehow we got to rationalize our domestic policies with global realities. Like, and you really fleshed out a number of those too. I'd like to harken back a little on. I think Dennis's point, it's very valid in terms of, you know, what's the potential for carbon capture and storage. It's huge in Western Canada. I don't know if my figures are totally right, but we were talking the other day and somebody said, well, you know, we can easily put down 100 million tons a year in our geological formations and still be able to go for 300 years. I didn't realize that potential was so great. And we do have our Carbon Management Canada and those entities, the field research team that are actually looking at carbon capture and storage globally and simulating very tough formations to put CO2 into. And you know, so maybe I think there's some really good hope there, some things we can flag. And the other one that I think you might have mentioned, but we're, besides being a leader in carbon capture storage, it's not just because we got cheap gas and the right geology. It's because of you know, our technology capability, and we actually got world scale, fully scaled commercial operations at Quest with the Shell refinery and SAS Boundary Dam project by SAS Power. You know, both those projects are sequestering a million tons per year. The other area, which is, I think I've heard it said, it's the low-hanging fruit, is the reduction in methane and that. And Canada, I was really quite impressed listening to Sohail Askapur talking about, you know, the president of Petroleum Technology Alliance, talking about all the technology and the leadership that we're taking here that again can be applied globally to reduce those methane things. That's, you know, methane is such a powerful greenhouse gas. It's somehow we got to trade up on the goodwill of what we're doing. It's one thing to sit there and argue you got the wrong policy. It's another thing though to be seen as somebody that really is you know, pushing the limits of what we can do and making a positive contribution. So I think that leadership and key technologies like CCS, which is going to make blue hydrogen. I can't see green hydrogen being economic very soon, but blue hydrogen could be a good addition, and that's our carbon capture and storage technology. And you mentioned the oil sands, and that's carbon capture storage. I'm hoping ADI is going to talk about the ways to get at the greenhouse gases from in situ bitumen, you know, with the enhanced solvent extraction and maybe even using heat sources like electromagnetic heat or even, although it's out a few years still, is the small scale nuclear modular reactors and that. And we definitely are leading on in the methane and again, even in the operations, I believe I'm correct in saying that in Canada, our methane emissions are only about 1% of production, whereas globally they averaging 3%. So anyhow, I just wanted to frame out a little or so. A lot of challenge in what you said. You got a tremendous handle on the regulatory thing, and somehow we got to crack that, and we got to build strong allies with the indigenous people, because they are the ones that will get rid of Bill C-48 and get the pipelines going, because they are hurting. You know, I got a lot of good friends there, and somehow we got to engage them and not the naysayers. But also we got a lot of good things going for us. And I thank you very much, Hal. You're a brilliant advocate of that whole area.